The tech executives had no idea their Uber driver once managed billion-dollar portfolios on Wall Street. Hey, Hidden Strength family! Tell us which country you're watching from, and if stories about resilience and hidden expertise inspire you, hit that subscribe button to join our community. You know how we automatically judge people's intelligence and success based on what job they're doing right now? Well, what happened during a simple Uber ride in San Francisco is about to completely change how you think about the people serving you every single day. Can you believe we have to take an Uber with some random driver? Complained 28-year-old tech entrepreneur Brad Stevenson as he slid into the back seat of the Honda Accord. This guy probably doesn't even understand basic economics. David Park, 52 years old, adjusted his rearview mirror and smiled politely at his passengers. With his worn baseball cap, 5-day stubble, and slightly wrinkled polo shirt, David looked exactly like what the three tech executives expected from their rideshare driver. Probably an immigrant or someone who'd never had a real career. "Where to today, gentlemen?" David asked with a slight Korean accent, programming the GPS for their destination to the Marriott downtown. "Financial district?" said Brad's business partner Mike Chen dismissively. "And try not to take the long way, we actually understand traffic patterns." The third passenger, venture capitalist James Walsh, was already on his phone discussing a major deal. "Yeah, we're in some Uber right now. Driver probably has no idea we're talking about moving $50 million in venture capital." David had been driving for UberX in San Francisco for 3 years. His passengers saw him as just another gig economy worker, someone driving because he probably couldn't get a real job, likely uneducated, definitely not someone who understood their world of high finance and tech investments. What none of them knew was that David Park had spent 15 years as one of Wall Street's most successful investment bankers. He'd managed portfolios worth over $2 billion, orchestrated major corporate mergers, and been personally responsible for some of the largest financial deals in tech industry history. In David's small studio apartment in Oakland, there were few visible reminders of his extraordinary financial career. Simple furniture from IKEA, a small TV, basic kitchen appliances. Nothing suggested that this modest living space belonged to someone who had once commanded million-dollar salaries and flown first class around the world. But in a filing cabinet hidden behind his closet were the remnants of his former life. MBA diploma from Wharton Business School, recommendation letters from Fortune 500 CEOs, and newspaper clippings with headlines like "Park orchestrates largest tech merger in history" and "Wall Street prodigy closes billion-dollar deal." The centerpiece was a framed photograph from 2019. David, in an expensive suit, shaking hands with the CEOs of 2 major corporations after closing a $3.2 billion acquisition deal that had made front-page news in the Wall Street Journal. So why was this financial genius now driving strangers around San Francisco for $20 an hour? The answer lay in a series of catastrophic events that had destroyed David's life in 2020. It started when David discovered that his senior partner at Goldman Sachs was using insider information to manipulate stock prices. When David reported the fraud to compliance, he expected the firm to investigate and take action. Instead, David found himself framed as the insider trader. His partner had planted evidence, suggesting David was the one selling confidential information, and the firm's investigation focused on David rather than the actual perpetrator. Within 6 months, David was fired, blacklisted from Wall Street, and facing federal charges that took 2 years and his entire savings to fight off. Even after being cleared of all charges, when the real criminal was finally exposed, David discovered that his reputation in finance was permanently destroyed. No major firm would hire him, clients wouldn't trust him, and the industry he devoted his career to had completely shut him out. Once you're accused of financial fraud, even if you're innocent, your career is over. David had told his wife Sarah during one of their last conversations before she left him. "No one will ever trust me with their money again." Sarah had divorced David 18 months later, taking their house, their savings, and their 12-year-old daughter, Jenny. David found himself alone, unemployed, and starting over at age 49 with nothing but his car and his knowledge. Driving for Uber wasn't David's career choice, it was his survival strategy. The flexible schedule allowed him to earn money while he tried to rebuild his life, and the anonymity meant he didn't have to explain his situation to people who would judge him for falling from Wall Street to ride-sharing. But David couldn't turn off 15 years of financial training. While driving passengers around San Francisco, he automatically analyzed market conditions, noticed economic patterns, and tracked investment opportunities. It was second nature, like a musician humming melodies or a doctor noticing symptoms. During his rideshare shifts, David overheard hundreds of business conversations. Tech executives discussing valuations, venture capitalists analyzing startups, entrepreneurs pitching investors. Most of the time, David listened to financial decisions that made him cringe amateur mistakes that he could see would cost millions. But David never spoke up. His passengers saw him as just the driver, and he'd learned that offering unsolicited financial advice only made people uncomfortable and suspicious about why their Uber driver seemed to know so much about high-level finance. That Tuesday morning, Brad, Mike, and James climbed into David's car discussing the biggest deal of their careers. Their startup, TechFlow Solutions, was about to be acquired by a major corporation for $200 million, and they were heading to sign the final paperwork. "Can you believe we're about to be worth $50 million each?" Brad was saying excitedly. "This acquisition is going to set us up for life." Mike was reviewing documents on his tablet. "The terms look good. $200 million in cash, immediate payout, no performance clauses." James, the lead investor, was on his phone with the acquiring company's attorneys. "Yeah, we're ready to sign. My clients are excited to take the immediate cash offer and move on to their next venture." David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. As someone who'd structured dozens of similar deals, he immediately recognized several red flags in what he was overhearing. The terms these men were describing weren't just bad, they were potentially catastrophic for the sellers. The immediate cash offer they were celebrating was actually a structured payout that would be subject to significant tax penalties. The no performance clauses meant they were giving up millions in potential future earnings. And the timing rushing to sign during a volatile market period suggested the buyers were taking advantage of the sellers' inexperience. David had seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times on Wall Street. Inexperienced entrepreneurs, excited by large numbers, signing deals that looked great on paper, but cost them millions in taxes, fees, and lost opportunities. "This is the deal of a lifetime," Brad was saying. $200 million cash, immediate close, no complications. David caught James's eye in the rearview mirror. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I couldn't help but overhear. Are you sure you've had an independent financial advisor review the tax implications of this structure?" The three men looked at David like he'd grown a second head. "Did our Uber driver just give us financial advice?" Mike laughed. "Dude, just drive the car and let us handle the business talk." James was more dismissive. "Driver, I appreciate your concern, but we have lawyers and accountants handling this. I don't think you understand the complexity of what we're discussing." David made a decision that drew on 15 years of Wall Street experience and his conscience. "Gentlemen, with respect, based on what I'm hearing, you're about to lose approximately $47 million in unnecessary taxes and fees." The car fell silent, except for the GPS giving turn directions. Brad turned around in his seat. "What did you just say?" "The deal structure you're describing, immediate cash payout with no deferrals, is going to trigger maximum tax liability. You'll lose about 35% to federal and state taxes immediately. The lack of earnout provisions means you're leaving potential future value on the table. And signing during this market volatility without protection clauses is extremely risky." Mike stared at David. "How do you know this stuff?" David pulled into a parking space near their destination and turned around to face his passengers. "Because I spent 15 years structuring deals exactly like this on Wall Street. And what you're about to sign isn't a great deal, it's a disaster disguised as a windfall." James's phone was buzzing with calls from the lawyers waiting for them to arrive and sign. "This is insane. Our driver is giving us merger advice?" "I'm not just your driver," David said quietly. "I'm David Park. I used to be a senior managing director at Goldman Sachs. I structured the MergerTech acquisition in 2018, the Dataflow deal in 2019, and about 50 other transactions that you probably read about in TechCrunch." The three men looked at each other in shock. Brad pulled out his phone and searched David Park Goldman Sachs. His eyes widened as he scrolled through search results. "Holy shit, you're actually him. The guy who did the $3.2 billion cloud tech merger." Mike was reading over Brad's shoulder. "It says here you were one of the top tech investment bankers on the West Coast. What are you doing driving Uber?" David's expression darkened. "Long story. But right now, you have about 20 minutes before you walk into that conference room and make the biggest financial mistake of your lives." James leaned forward. "Okay, assuming you're legit, what's wrong with our deal?" David pulled out a notebook and started sketching the deal structure. "First, The immediate cash payout triggers ordinary income tax rates instead of capital gains. That's an extra 15% in taxes you don't need to pay. Second, you have no earn-out provisions, so if your technology performs better than expected, the buyers keep all the upside. Third, you're signing during a market dip when your company is undervalued. Brad was calculating on his phone. 15% extra taxes on $200 million. That's $30 million, plus state taxes, plus the earn-out value you're leaving behind, plus the undervaluation factor. You should be walking away with about $90 million more than you're currently getting. Mike stared at the numbers David had written. This can't be right. Our lawyers reviewed everything. Your lawyers are probably real estate or business formation attorneys, not M&A specialists. And your buyer's lawyers are definitely M&A specialists who structured this deal to maximize their advantage. James's phone rang again, the acquiring company's legal team wondering where they were. David, if what you're saying is true, what should we do? David looked at his watch. You need to walk into that meeting and ask for a 48-hour extension to review the tax structure with an independent M&A attorney. Tell them you want to explore alternative deal structures that optimize for tax efficiency. Won't that make them think we're backing out? Brad asked. If they're legitimate buyers, they'll respect due diligence. If they refuse to give you time for proper review, that tells you everything you need to know about this deal. The three men looked at each other, then back at David. James made the decision. David, will you come with us? As our advisor? David shook his head. I can't practice investment banking without proper licenses and firm affiliation, but I can give you the names of 3 M&A attorneys who specialize in tech deals and won't charge you unless they save you money. Brad was still staring at David in amazement. I can't believe our Uber driver just potentially saved us $40 million. I'm not your Uber driver, David replied. I'm your wake-up call. The 3 entrepreneurs followed David's advice. They requested a 48-hour extension, hired one of his recommended attorneys, and restructured the deal with proper tax planning and earn-out provisions. The final deal closed 6 weeks later for $267 million instead of $200 million, with tax-optimized structure that saved the sellers an additional $31 million in tax liability. The total value David's advice had created was $98 million. Brad called David personally after the closing. David, we owe you everything. That 10-minute conversation in your car was worth more than our entire legal team's previous advice. I'm just glad you listened, David replied. Most people don't want financial advice from their Uber driver. Mike organized a meeting with David the following week. David, we want to offer you a position as our chief financial advisor for our next ventures. David was interested, but cautious. I appreciate the offer, but my background is complicated. I was blacklisted from Wall Street after false accusations. James had done his research. We know about the insider trading investigation. We also know you were completely exonerated, and that your former partner is now in federal prison for the crimes you were accused of. The financial industry has a long memory for accusations and a short memory for exonerations, David said sadly. Then we'll create our own financial industry, Brad announced. David, we want to start an investment fund focused on helping tech entrepreneurs avoid exactly the kind of mistakes we almost made. Will you be our founding partner? 6 months later, David co-founded TechGuard Capital, an investment advisory firm specializing in protecting startup founders from predatory deals and tax-inefficient transactions. His first-hand experience with both Wall Street sophistication and personal financial destruction gave him unique credibility with entrepreneurs. David saved us $98 million during a 10-minute Uber ride, Brad told TechCrunch in an interview. He understands both sides, the high-level finance and the human cost of making mistakes. TechGuard Capital's first fund raised $50 million, with David as managing partner. The firm's mission statement read, "Protecting entrepreneurs from financial predators, because everyone deserves access to Wall Street-level expertise." David was invited to speak at Stanford Business School about ethical finance and second chances. "I lost everything because I tried to do the right thing," he told the students. "But I learned that your value doesn't disappear just because your circumstances change." The 3 entrepreneurs who had dismissed their Uber driver became David's biggest advocates and closest friends. They often joked that it was the most expensive Uber ride in Historia expensive for the people who almost took advantage of them. David taught us that expertise comes in unexpected packages, Mike said during a podcast interview. He was sitting in the front seat the whole time, listening to us make terrible decisions until he couldn't stay quiet anymore. 2 years later, TechGuard Capital had advised on over 200 deals and saved clients an estimated $400 million in unnecessary taxes and fees. David had rebuilt his reputation not by returning to Wall Street, but by creating something better. When asked about his experience driving for Uber, David is always positive. Those 3 years taught me humility and showed me how many talented people are overlooked because of their circumstances. It was the best education I never wanted. David still keeps his Honda Accord, though he no longer drives for Uber. It reminds me that everyone has a story, and you never know when the person serving you might be exactly the person you need. The Uber driver they looked down on had turned out to be one of Wall Street's most accomplished bankers. But more importantly, he'd learned that true success isn't about the prestige of your current jobits, about the value you create for others, regardless of what uniform you're wearing. James Walsh, now a partner at TechGuard Capital, often tells people, "The best financial advice I ever received came from someone I initially dismissed as just an Uber driver." David taught me that intelligence and expertise don't disappear just because someone's circumstances change. Today, David's daughter Jenny, now 15, proudly tells her friends that her dad is a successful entrepreneur who helps protect other business owners from financial predators. She doesn't know about the years of struggle, the failed lawsuits, or the nights David spent in his car wondering if he'd ever recover. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from the people you least expect. David tells audiences when speaking about his experience, and sometimes the person you're ignoring might be exactly the person who can change your life. The Uber driver they thought was beneath them turned out to be the financial expert who saved their future. And in doing so, he proved that respect shouldn't be based on job titles. Wisdom can come from unexpected sources, and everyone deserves a second chance to show their true value. Have you ever dismissed someone based on their job, only to discover their incredible hidden expertise? David's journey reminds us that circumstances can change anyone's situation, but talent, knowledge, and character remain constant. If this story inspired you to show respect to everyone who serves you, regardless of their current role, share it with someone who needs this reminder. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments.